I first noticed the way her porch light stayed on long after sunrise, a small lighthouse with no ship to guide. The house across from mine used to hum with small noises, a kettle sighing, the soft cadence of two voices weaving ordinary days. After the funeral, everything thinned. Even the air at her doorway felt colder, as if the season had changed only for that small square of street. She moved through mornings like someone carrying a full bucket that cannot spill, keys balanced in one hand, a folded scarf held like a promise in the other. She was a teacher before the world tilted, the kind who remembered the names of crossing guards and cafeteria workers. Now her voice had retreated somewhere I could not reach, and the mail stacked up in careful, guilty towers. I learned to read her days by what remained untouched. Grief has a posture. I recognized it because I carried it too. The shoulders notched forward to protect a heart that no longer trusts its own beat. The gaze that slides past neighbors, not from rudeness but to survive the flood of their kindness. Some afternoons, she sat in her car without starting it, hands on the wheel, as if waiting for instructions from a life that used to answer back. There are sounds that widen a silence. The clink of a spoon in an empty kitchen, the drag of slippers along hardwood. Late at night, her television cast a pale window on the living room wall. The light flickered like a restless tide, and I thought of how the mind tries to outtalk the ache, how it fails, how it tries again. A photo on a shelf becomes a moon, and everything in the house circles it, faithful and tired. I watered my azaleas and pretended not to watch. Loss makes us polite in the wrong moments. I told myself she needed space, then watched space turn into a snowfield without footprints. The trash bin lingered at the curb a day too long. The curtains stayed drawn. Once, when a breeze tested the chimes under her eave, I heard the kind of fragile music that only sadness hears as company. If you have loved long enough, you learn the weight of anniversaries you never marked on any calendar. The first bill with one name. The first dinner plated for one. The first laugh that surprises and then punishes. I wanted to cross the street, to say something useful, but usefulness is a rare flower in winter. So I kept noticing, kept holding her in the quiet way neighbors sometimes hold one another, and waited for a door to open that I could gently step through. The first door that opened was not hers, but mine. I heard the soft knock one afternoon when the sun had begun to slide behind the roofs, turning everything a muted gold. When I answered, she stood there with hesitant eyes, a folded dish towel in her hands as though it were armor. She said she had made too much soup. Her voice trembled, the way branches do in a gentle wind. I could see the effort it took to stand on my porch, to step outside of her sorrow for even a moment. I invited her in, and we sat at my small kitchen table, the steam from the bowls rising between us. At first, silence sat heavier than the soup itself. Then, almost like water finding a crack, she spoke. She told me how the mornings hurt most, how the absence of his footsteps became a noise louder than any alarm. She confessed she sometimes spoke into the air, pretending he still listened. Her words were careful, as though she feared they might break if she laid them down too quickly. I listened, because sometimes that is the best gift the grieving can receive. I did not tell her it would be okay, because we both knew the world had changed permanently. Instead, I told her what my neighbor once told me years ago, when I too was learning to live after loss. I said, healing does not mean forgetting. It means carrying love differently, in a way that allows your heart to keep beating without shame. Something in her eyes softened, though tears still rested on the edges. I suggested she consider a small group that met weekly at the community center, other widows who gathered not to erase grief, but to share the weight of it. At first, she shook her head. The thought of speaking her pain aloud to strangers frightened her, but then she asked me if I would go with her, just once. The following week, we walked side by side into that circle of quiet souls. Some faces looked as tired as hers, others carried faint traces of renewal. She sat with her hands folded tight, shoulders drawn in. But when another woman shared a story of how she still set out to plates at dinner, I saw recognition flicker in her. Her silence was not emptiness anymore, it was the beginning of belonging. She didn't speak that day, but when we left, I noticed she breathed differently, as though for the first time, her lungs had remembered. There was still air enough to carry her forward. The weeks unfolded like cautious petals, one meeting after another. At first, she remained quiet in the circle, listening with the intensity of someone clutching onto each word like a lifeline. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, her posture began to change. One evening, she spoke. Her voice wavered, but she told the group about the night she could not bring herself to turn off the porch light, fearing that darkness would feel like betrayal. The room grew still. Every face turned toward her, not with pity, but with recognition. She was no longer alone in her silence. From that moment, something in her shifted. She began to linger after the meetings, speaking gently to other widows, offering a hand on the shoulder, or sitting beside them when tears arrived unannounced. Her grief did not vanish, lived in her still, like a scar, but now it had purpose. She had discovered that her own brokenness could serve as a lantern for others stumbling through the same shadows. One woman, much younger, confessed she couldn't sleep in her bed since her husband passed. My neighbor leaned in and told her she had spent weeks on her couch, waiting for courage to return to the bedroom. They both laughed softly through tears, the kind of laugh that feels like a small rebellion against sorrow. Another woman admitted she no longer cooked because food for one seemed tasteless. The widow I had once seen sitting silent in her car now shared recipes and promised to bring extra portions the following week. What astonished me most was not the words she offered, but the way her face began to change. The heaviness around her eyes lightened, as if kindness itself was lifting her. One evening, as she hugged another grieving woman, I saw it the first real smile since her husband's passing. It was fragile but genuine, like the first bloom of spring after a merciless winter. She no longer carried her grief as a weight pressed against her chest, but as a thread woven into the tapestry of her life. Helping others did not erase her pain, but it gave her a reason to carry it differently. In the act of lifting another, she discovered her own heart rising. Now, when her porch light glows at night, I don't see loneliness. I see it as a beacon, a sign that within those walls lives a woman who turned her sorrow into compassion. She reminds me, and anyone who meets her, that hope is not something we wait for, it is something we create together, even out of brokenness. What her journey teaches us is that healing does not come from burying the pain, but from planting seeds within it. By reaching out, by offering a hand to others who hurt, she found her own heart slowly mending. We are never as alone as grief wants us to believe. Hope multiplies when it is shared, and sometimes, helping another stand is the very thing that steadies our own steps. If this story touched you, share it forward, leave your reflections in the comments, and join us by subscribing for more stories that remind us of our strength.